Hello and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live. I am Star Wars. No, it's just my T-shirt today. Free advertising, I guess, for George. More free advertising. Welcome back to Storytime Classics Live. I'm Bo Heckman. This is produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company, and today we have our guest reader back again to continue with Love in the Time of Cholera, the English version, Oscar de las Salas. Welcome back. How are you today?
Thank you, Bo. Thank you for having me again. Today I'm wearing shorts and, like a Zoom call. I had a Zoom call this morning. So it's like from waist up, it's all like businessman. From waist down, it's like party. Anyway, so I'm on shorts. So sorry. I hope
The
we don't
power
get
of
vetted anyway. It's like, just like X-rated here.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in any state that you may be in. Excellent. Where are we in
Nobody
Love
knows.
in the Time of? Well, I've just lost it now. what is happening in Love in the Time of Cholera?
Well, the love, what it seems to be a love triangle, because that's the reality of it all. Fermina Daza is trying to get away from Florentino Ariza, the guy that works at the Telegraph that promised his love to her. So then now she's back to Cartagena. They don't say that it's Cartagena. They write it. It doesn't say that it's Cartagena, but she's back in the city, and her cousin Hildebranda is coming to visit. So something is going to happen today in the reading that is very exciting to hear and to read. So it's crazy, but it's fantastic. I love it. It's a love triangle and it's a love story. So very well written as well.
Excellent. I will get out of your hair then and let you continue with Love in the Time of Cholera. Thank you again. Good to see you.
Thank you. I have to adjust the camera because I look like a midget. So everyone, plus you're gonna see my legs, which is like we were just joking about it. So anyway, we're back to my reading. So where were we? Once again, if you are tuning in, I'm reading Love in the Time of Cholera for um, Southwest Southwest Shakespeare Company. And Love in the Time of Cholera is a book that it was written by Colombian author Gabriel Garcia Marquez. We are on page one. Sorry, I have to take it back. Take it back. 128. We're on page 128, but actually I'm going to start on page 129. 129. And of this book, this is the book that some of you are reading with me. Thank you very much if you're reading with me, so you can practice your English. Some of you, believe it or not, are reading both with me in English and Spanish. So this is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But before I start, I'm just looking at the screen, and the Southwest Shakespeare has a fall festival, and there's some tickets on sale now. You can write to info@swshakespeare.org. And it's only few tickets actually left for what I understand, and is all capacity within CDC guidelines. And you can, I think there's a virtual and in-person type of hybrid scenario on this. But anyway, Bo can tell you more about it, or if you can write to info@swshakespeare.org, you can get information about this. So back to Love in the Time of Cholera. This book, page 129 today, and what is happening? Hildebranda, Fermina Daza's cousin, comes to Cartagena from Fonseca. That's the name of the uh, town where she's from, and she comes to visit. This is after Fermina Daza decides that she does not want to talk or have any contact with Florentino Ariza. Florentino Ariza is the guy who works in the Telegraph and promised love to her. And it was an incredible, passionate romance over letters that went south because she thought that it was not the person after she came back from a long trip up to the Andes, so to the mountains. So let's see what happens. So Hildebranda trip had also been imposed by her parents in an effort to put distance between her and her impossible love. Hildebranda was dating an older man who happened to be married. Anyway, although they wanted her to think that it was to help Fermina decide on a good match. Hildebranda had accepted, hoping to mock forgetfulness at her cousin, and as her cousin had done before her. Remember, they had a conversation prior about their loves and all the stuff when Fermina Daza was at Hildebranda's house out in Fonseca, up in the mountains. And she had arranged with the telegraph operator in Fonseca, that's the town, to send her messages with the greatest prudence. And that is why her disillusion was so bitter when she learned that Firminidas had rejected Florentino Ariza. Moreover, Hildebranda had a universal conception of love, and she believed that whatever happened to one love affected the other, or all other loves throughout the world. Still, she did not renounce her plan. With an audacity that caused a crisis of dismay in Fermina Daza, she went to the telegraph office alone, intending to win the favor of Florentino Ariza. She would not have recognized him, for there was nothing about him that corresponded to the image she had formed from Fermina Daza. At first glance, it seemed impossible that her cousin could have been on the verge of a madness because of that almost invisible clerk with his air of a whipped dog, whose clothing worthy of a rabbi in disgrace, and whose solemn manner could not perturb anyone's heart. But she soon repented of her first impression, for Florentino Ariza placed himself at her unconditional service without knowing who she was. He never found out. No one could have understood her as she did, so that he did not ask for identification or even for her address. His solution was very simple. She would pass by the telegraph office on Wednesday's afternoon so that he could place her lover's answers in her hand and nothing more. And yet, when he read the written message that Hildebranda brought to him, he asked if she would accept a suggestion. And she agreed. Florentino Ariza first made some corrections between the lines, erased them, rewrote them, had no more room, and last tore up the page, and wrote a completely new message that she thought very touching. When she left the telegraph office, Hildebranda was on the verge of tears. He's ugly, she said to Fermina Daza, but he is all love. What most struck Hildebranda was her cousin's solitude. She seemed, she told her, an old maid of 20, accustomed to large scattered families in houses where no one was certain how many people were living or eating at any given time. Hildebranda could not imagine a girl of her age reduced to the cloister of a private life. That was true. For the time she woke at 6 in the morning until she turned out the light of the bedroom, Fermina Daza devoted herself to killing time. Life was imposed on her from outside. First, at the final rooster crow, the milkman woke her with his rapping on the door knocker. Then came the knock of the fishwife with her box of red snappers dying on a bed of algae, the sumptuous fruit sellers with vegetables from Maria la Baja and fruit from San Jacinto. And then, for the rest of the day, everyone knocked at the door. Beggars, Girls with lottery tickets, the Sisters of Charity, the knife grinder with the gossip, the man who brought bottles, the man who brought old gold, the man who brought newspapers, fake gypsies who offered to read one's destiny in cards, in the lines of one's palm, in the coffee grounds, in the water, in washbanes. Gala Placidia, that's the maid, spent a week opening and closing the street door to say no another day, or shouting from the balcony in a full humor to stop bothering us, damn it. We already bought everything we need. She had replaced Aunt Scholastica with so much fervor and so much grace that Fermina confused them to the point of loving her. She had the obsessions of a slave. Whenever she had free time, she would go to the workroom to iron the linens. She kept them perfect. She kept them in cupboards with lavender, and she ironed and unfolded not only what she had just washed, but also what she may have lost its brightness through the disuse. With the same care, she continued to maintain the wardrobe of Fermina Sanchez, Fermina's mother, who had died 14 years before. Fermina Daza was the only one who made the decisions. She ordered what they would eat, what they would buy, what had to be done in every circumstance. And in that way, she determined the life in the house where in reality nothing had to be determined. When she finished washing the cages and feeding the birds and making certain that the flowers wanted for nothing, she was at a loss. Often she was expelled from school. She would fall asleep at siesta and not wake up until the next day. The painting classes were only a more amusing way to kill time. Her relationship with her father had lacked affection since the expulsion of Aunt Scholastica, although they had found a way to live together without bothering each other. When she awoke, he had already gone to his business. He rarely missed the ritual of lunch, although he almost never ate, for the aperitifs and Galician appetizers at the parish cafe satisfied him. He did not eat supper either. They left his meal on the table, everything on a long plate covered by another, although they knew that he would not eat it until the next day when it was reheated for his breakfast. Once a week, he gave his daughter money for expenses, which he calculated with care and she administered with rigor. But he listened with pleasure to many requests she made for unforeseen expenses. He never questioned a penny she spent. He never asked her for explanations, but she behaved as if she had to make an accounting before the tribunal of the Holy Office. He had never spoken to her about the nature of condition of his business, and he had never taken her to his offices in the port, which were in a location forbidden to decent young ladies, even if the company of their fathers. Oh, that's right, the port. Lorenzo Daza did not come home before 10 o'clock at night, which was the curfew hour during the less critical periods of the wars. We were in between wars in Colombia, by the way, and there was curfew. There's other stuff, historical stuff that I could talk to you about later. Until that time, he would stay at the parish cafe playing one game or another, for he was an expert in all salon games and a good teacher as well. He always came home sober, not disturbing his daughter, despite the fact that he had his first anisette when he awoke, and he continued chewing at the end of his unlit cigar and drinking at regular intervals throughout the day. One night, however, Fermina heard him come in. She heard his Cossack steps on the stair, his heavy breathing in a second floor hallway, his pounding with the flat of his hand on her bedroom door. She opened it, and for the first time she was frightened by his twisted eye and the slurring of his words. We are ruined, he said. Total ruin. So now you know. That was all he said, and he never said again. And nothing happened to indicate whether he had told the truth. But after that night, Fermina knew that she was alone in the world. She lived in a social limbo. Her former schoolmates were in a heaven that was close to her, above all after the dishonor of her expulsion, and she was not a neighbor to the neighbors because they had known her without a past in the uniform of the Academy of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin. Her father's world was one of traders and stevedores, hmm, of war refugees in the public shelter of the parish cafe, of all solitary man. In the last year, the painting classes had alleviated her seclusion somewhat, for the teacher preferred group classes and would bring the other pupils to the sewing room. But they were girls of very difficult and undefined social circumstances, and for Fermina Daza, they were no more than borrowed friends whose affection ended with the classes. Hildebranda wanted to open the house, Everett bring in her father's musicians and fireworks and castles of gunpowder, and have a carnival dance whose gale winds will clear out her cousin's the moth-eaten spirit. But she soon realized that her proposals were not to avail, and for a very simple reason: there was no one to invite. In any case, it was she who thrust Fermina Daza into life. In the afternoon, after the painting classes, she allowed herself to be taken out to see the city. Fermina Daza showed her the route she had taken every day with Aunt Scholastica. The bench in the little park where Florentino Arisa pretended to read while she waited for her, the narrow streets along which he followed her, the hiding places for their letters, the sinister palace where the prison of the Holy Office had been located, later restored and converted into the Academy of Presentation of the Blessed Virgin, which she hated with all her soul. They climbed the hill of the Papyrus Cemetery, where Florentino Arisa played the violin according to the direction of the winds, so that she could listen to him in bed, and from there were viewed the entire historic historic city. The broken roofs and the decaying walls, the rubble of fortress among the brambles, the trail of islands in the bay, the hulls of the poor around the swamps, and the immense Caribbean. This is so true. This is so Cartagena. On the Christmas Eve, they went to midnight mass in the cathedral. Fermina sat where she used to hear Florentino Arisa's confidential music with greatest clarity, and she showed her cousin the exact spot where, on a night like this, she had seen his frightened eyes up close for the first time. They ventured alone as far as the arcade of the scribes. They bought sweets. They were amused in the shop that sold fancy paper, and Fermina Daza showed her cousin the place where she suddenly discovered that her love was nothing more than an illusion. She herself had not realized that every step she took from her house to the school, every spot in the city, every moment of her recent past did not seem to exist except by the grace of Florentino Ariza. Hildebranda pointed this out to her, but she did not admit it because she never would have admitted that to Florentino Ariza. For better or for worse, was the only thing that had even happened to her in her life. It was during this time that a Belgian photographer came to the city and set up his studio at the end of the Arcade of the Scribes, and all those with the money to pay took advantage of the opportunity to have their pictures taken. Fermina and Hildebranda were amongst the first. They emptied Fermina Sanchez's clothes closet. They shared the finest dresses, the parasols, the party shoes, the hats, and they dressed as Miss Century ladies. Gala Placidia, the maid, helped them lace up the corsets. She showed them how to move inside the wireframes of the hoop skirts, how to wear gloves, how to button the high heel boots. Hildebranda preferred a broad brimmed hat with ostrich feathers that hung down over her shoulder. Fermina wore a more recent model decorated with paint, plaster, fruit, and caroline flowers. At last they giggled when they looked in the mirror and saw the resemblance to the daguerreotypes of the grandmothers, and they went off happy, laughing for all what it worth to have the photograph of their lives taken. Gala Placidia watched from the balcony as they crossed the park with their parasols open, tottering on their high heels and pushing against the hoop skirts with their bodies as if they were children's walkers. And she gave them her blessing so that God will help them in their portraits. There was a mob in front of the Belgian studio because photographs were being taken of Benny Centeno, who had won the boxing championship in Panama. He wore his boxing trunks and his boxing gloves and his crown, and it was not easy to photograph him because he had to hold fighting stance for a whole minute and breathe as little as possible. But as soon as he put up his guard, his fans burst into cheers, and he could not resist the temptation to please them by showing off his skills. When it was the cousin's turn, the sky had clouded over and rain seemed imminent, but they allowed their faces to be powdered with starch, and they leaned against an alabaster column which with such ease that they remained motionless for more than the time that it was reasonable. It was an immortal portrait. When Hildebrand died on her ranch at the Flores de Maria, when she was almost 100 years old, they found her copy locked in the bedroom closet, hidden among the folds of the perfume sheets along the fossil of thought in a letter that had faded with time. For many years, Fermina Daza kept hers on the first page of a family album. Then it disappeared without anyone's knowing how or when, and came into the possession of Florentino Ariza through a series of unbelievable coincidences when they were both over 60 years old. When Fermina and Hildebranda came out of the Belgian studio, there were so many people in the plaza across from the arcade of the scribes then that even in the balconies were crowded. They had forgotten their faces were white with stars and that their lips were painted with chocolate colored salve and that their clothes were not appropriate for the time of the day or the age. The streets greeted them with catcalls and mockery. They were cornered trying to escape public derision, when the landau drawn by the golden chestnuts opened a path through the crowd. The cackles ceased and the hostile groups dispersed. Hildebranda was never to forget her first sight of the man who appeared on the footboard in his satin top hat, his brocaded vest, his knowing gestures, the sweetness in his eyes, the authority of his presence. Although she had never seen him before, she recognized him immediately. The previous month, Fermina Daza had spoken about him in an offhand way and with no signs of interest. One afternoon, when she did not want to pass by the house of the Marquis de Casalduero, because the landau with the golden horses was stopped in front of the door, she told her who the owner was and attempted to explain the reasons why for her antipathy, although she did not say a word about his courting her. Hildebranda thought no more about him, but when she identified him as a vision out of a legend, standing in the carriage door with one foot on the ground and the other one on the footboard, she could not understand her cousin's motives. "Please get in," said Dr. Rubino. "I will take you wherever you want to go." Fermina Daza began a gesture of refusal, but Hildebranda had already accepted. Dr. Juvenal Urbino jumped down and with his fingertips, almost without touching her, helped her into the carriage. Fermina had no alternative but to climb in after her, her face blazing with embarrassment. The house was only 3 blocks away. The cousins did not realize that Dr. Urbino had given instructions to the coachman, but he must have done so, because it took the carriage almost half an hour to reach its destination. The girls were on the principal seat, and he sat opposite to them, facing the back of the carriage. Fermina turned her head toward the window and was lost in the void. Hildebranda, on the other hand, was delighted, and Dr. Urbino was even more delighted by her delight. As soon as the carriage began to move, she sensed the warm odor of the leather seats, the intimacy of the padded interior, and she said that it seemed a nice place to spend the rest of one's life. Very soon they began to laugh, to exchange jokes as if they were old friends, and they began to watch wits in a simple word game that consisted of placing a nonsense syllable after every other syllable. They pretended that Fermina did not understand them, although they knew she not only understood but was listening as well, which is why they did it. After much laughter, Hildebranda confessed that she could no longer endure the torture of her boots. "Nothing could be simpler," said Dr. Rubino. "Let us see who finishes first." He began to unlace his own boots, and Hildebranda accepted the challenge. It was not easy for her to do because the stays in the corset did not allow her to bend. But Dr. Rubino dealt until she took her boots out from under her skirt with a triumphant laugh, as if she had just finished them out of a pond. Then both of them looked at Fermina and saw her magnificent golden oriel profile sharper than ever against the blaze of the setting sun. She was furious for 3 reasons: because of the undeserved situation in which she found herself, because of Hildebranda's libertine behavior, and because she was certain that the carriage was driving in circles in order to postpone their arrival. But Hildebranda had lost all restraint. Now I realized, now I realized, she said, that what bothered me was not my shoes, but this wire cage. Dr. Urbino understood that she was referring to her hoop skirt, and he seized the opportunity as it flew by. Nothing could be simpler, he said. Take it off. With the rapid movement of a prestidigitor, he moved his handkerchief from his pocket and covered his eyes with it. I won't look, he said. The blindfold emphasized the purity of his lips, surrounded by his round black beard and his mustache with wax lips, and she herself felt shaken by a sudden surge of panic. She looked at Fermina now, and now she saw that she was not furious but terrified that she may be capable of taking off her skirt. Hildebranda became serious, and she asked her in sign language, what should we do? Fermina answered in the same code that if they did not go straight home, she would throw herself out of the moving carriage. I'm waiting, said the doctor. You can look now, said Hildebranda. When Dr. Venat Rubino removed the blindfold, he found her change, and he understood that the game had ended, and that had not ended well. At a sign from him, the coachman turned the carriage around and drove into the Park of Evangels, just as the lighter was making his rounds. All the churches were ringing the Angelus. Hildebranda hurried out of the carriage, somewhat disturbed at the idea that she had offended her cousin, and she said goodbye to the doctor with a perfunctory handshake. Fermina did the same, but when she tried to withdraw her hand in its satin glove, the Dr. Rubino squeezed her finger. Oh, her ring finger, this one. I'm waiting for your answer, he said. Then Fermina pulled harder, and her empty glove was left dangling in the doctor's hand. But she did not wait to retrieve it. She went to bed without eating. Hildebranda, as if nothing had happened, came into the bedroom after her supper with Gala Placidia in the kitchen, and her inborn wit commented on the events of the afternoon. She did not attempt to hide her enthusiasm for Dr. Urbino, for his elegance and charm, and Fermina refused to comment, but was brimming with anger. At one point, Hildebranda confessed that when Dr. Rubino covered his eyes and she saw the splendor of his perfect teeth between his rosy lips, she had felt an irresistible desire to devour him with kisses. Fermina Daza turned to the wall and, with no wish to offend, but smiling and with all her heart, put an end of the conversation. What a whore you are, she said. Her sleep was restless. She saw Dr. Juvenal Rubino everywhere. She saw him laughing, singing, emitting sulphur sparks from between his teeth, with his eyes blindfolded, mocking her with a word game that had no fixed rules, driving up to the Popier cemetery in a different carriage. She awoke long before dawn and lay exhausted and wakeful, with her eyes closed, thinking of the countless years she still had to live. Later, Hildebranda was bathing. She wrote a letter as quickly as possible, folded as quickly as possible, put it in an envelope as quickly as possible, and before Hildebranda came out of the bathroom, she had Gala Placidia delivered to Dr. Juvenal Urbino. It was one of her typical letters, not a syllable too many or too few, in which she told the doctor yes. Wow. He could speak to her father, so she gave the doctor a yes to come and talk to her and have a relationship, basically, to date her, basically. When Florentino Ariza learned that Fermina Daza was going to marry a physician with with family and fortune, very much needed at that time in Cartagena, educated in Europe and with an extraordinary reputation for a man of his years, there was no power on earth that could raise him from his prostration. Transito Ariza did all she could and more, using all the stratagems of a sweetheart to console him when she realized that he had lost his speech and his appetite and was spending nights on end in constant weeping. And by the end of the week, he was eating again. This is too funny. Then she spoke to Don Leo XII Loaiza, the only one of three brothers who was still alive. And without telling him the reason, she pleaded with him to give his nephew any job at all in the navigation company, as long as it was in a port lost in the jungle of the Magdalena River, where there was no mail and no telegraph, and no one who would tell him anything about damnable, damnable city. His uncle did not give him the job out of the deference to his brother's widow, for she could not bear the very existence of her husband's illegitimate son, but he found him employment as a telegraph operator in Villa de Leyva. Villa de Leyva is a town that is up in the Andes. It's very cold, and it's been said, or history says, that that's supposed to be the capital of the New Granada, or the New Granada, which was the kingdom of the Castilla and La Mancha in the Americas. As you know, Colombia was not only what is Colombia today. Colombia was Colombia, what is today Panama, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, and a bigger portion of Brazil. So Colombia it was called the Grand Colombia. So Villa de Leyva was up the Andes, and it was a strategic location uh, for Spaniards to gather all the gold and bring it to the Caribbean, and therefore take it to Spain. There's a lot of information here for you. Anyway, his uncle did not give him the job out of deference to his brother's widow, but she could not bear the very existence of her husband's illegitimate son, but he found him employment as a telegraph operator in Villa de Leyva, a dreamy city more than 20 days' journey away and almost 3,000 meters above the sea level of the street of windows. Florentino Ariza was never very conscious of that curative journey. He would remember he would remember it always, as he remembered everything that happened during that period through the rearview lenses of his misfortune. When he received a telegram informing him of his appointment, it did not even occur to him to consider it, but Lothario Thugot convinced him with Germanic arguments that a brilliant career awaited him in public administration. He told him the telegraph is a profession of the future. He gave him a pair of gloves lined with rabbit fur and a hat worthy of the steeps and an overcoat with a plush collar, tried and proven in the icy winters of Bavaria. Yeah, it's very cold. It's very close It's Villa de Leyva is very high in the mountains, and it's very therefore it's very high. Therefore, it's closer to the sun, and it's very hot. Or the sun, when it's summertime, is really hot, but it's really cold because you are in the top of the Andes. Uncle Leo the 12th gave him two serge suits and a pair of waterproof boots that had belonged to his older brother. He also gave him a cabin passage to the next boat. Transito Ariza altered the clothing and made it smaller too for her son, who was less corpulent than his father and much more shorter than the German. And she bought him woolen socks and a long underwear so that he would have everything he needed to resist the rigors of the mountain wastelands. Florentino Ariza, hardened by so much suffering, attended to the preparations for his journey as if he were a dead man attending to the preparations of his own funeral. The same iron hermetism with which he had revealed to no one but his mother the secret of his repressed passion meant that he did not tell anyone he was going away, and he did not say goodbye to anyone. But on the eve of his departure, he committed, with full awareness, a final mad act of the heart that might well have cost him his life. At midnight, he put on his Sunday suit and went to the stand alone under Firmina's balcony to play the love waltz he had composed for her, which was known only to the two of them and which for 3 years had been the emblem of their frustrated complicity. He played, murmuring the words, his violin bathed in tears, or with an aspiration so intense that with the first measures of the dogs on the street, where am I? Oh yeah, with the first measures of the dogs on the street, and then the dogs all over the city began to howl. But then, little by little, they were quieted by the spell of the music, and then the waltz ended in a supernatural silence. The balcony did not open, and no one appeared on the street. Not even the night watchman, who almost always came running with his oil lamp in an effort to profit in some small way from the serenades. The act was an exorcism of relief for Florentino Ariza, for when he put the violin back into the case and walked down the dead streets without looking back, he no longer felt he was living the next morning, but he had gone away many years before with the irrevocable determination never to return. The boat, one of the three identical vessels belonging to the River Company of the Caribbean, had been renamed in honor of the founders, Pius V Loaiza. It was a floating two-story wooden house on a wide, level iron hull, and its maximum draft of 5 feet allowed it to negotiate the variable depths of the river. The older boats had been built in Cincinnati in mid-century on the legendary model of the vessels that traveled the Ohio and the Mississippi River, with a wheel on each side powered by a boiler. Like them, the boats of the River Company of the Caribbean had a lower deck almost level with the water, with the steam engines, engines and the galleys and the sleeping quarters like hen houses where the crew hung their hammocks, crisscrossed at different heights. On the upper deck were the bridge, the cabins of the captain and his officers, and the recreation and the dining room where notable passengers were invited, at least wants to have dinner and play cards. On the middle deck were six first-class cabins on either side of a passage that serves as a common dining room. And in the prow was a sitting room open to the river, with carved wood railings, mhm, and iron columns, where most of the passengers hung their hammocks at midnight. Unlike the older boats, these did not have paddle wheels at the sides. Instead, there was an enormous wheel with horizontal paddles at the at the stern, just underneath the suffocating toilets on the passenger deck. He came, oh my gosh. Florentino Ariza had not taken the trouble to explore the boat when he came aboard on Sunday in July at 7 o'clock in the morning, as those traveling for the first time did almost by instinct. He became aware of new milieu only at dusk, as they were sailing past the hamlet of Calamar, when he went to stern to urinate and saw, through the opening in the toilet, a gigantic paddle wheel turning under his feet with a volcanic display of a foam and steam. Those were the boats that used to go up and down the Magdalena River in Colombia. This is so true. He had never traveled before. He had with him a tin trunk with his clothes for the mountains wastelands, the illustrated novels that he brought in pamphlet from every month, and that he himself saw into the cardboard covers, and the books of love poetry that he recited from memory, and we were that were about to crumble into dust with so much reading. He had left behind his violin, for he identified it too closely with his misfortune. His mother had obliged him to take his petacle, a very popular and practical bedroll with its pillow sheet, a small pewter chamber pot, and a mosquito netting, all of these wrapped in straw matting tied with two hemp ropes for hanging a hammock in an emergency. Florentino Ariza had not wanted to take it, for he thought it would be useless in a cabin that provided bed and bedclothes. But from the very first night, he had reason once again to be grateful for his mother's good sense. At least, at the least moment, the, a passenger dressed in evening clothes boarded the boat. He had arrived early in the morning on a ship from Europe and was in the company by the provincial governor himself. He wanted to continue his journey without a delay, along with his wife and daughter, and a livered servant with seven trunks with gold fittings, which were almost too bulky for the stairway. To accommodate the unexpected travelers, the captain, a giant from Curacao, called on the passengers' indigenous sense of patriotism. In a jumble, in a jumble of Spanish and Curacao patois, he explained to Florentino Ariza that the man in the evening dress was the new plenipotentiary from England on his way to the capital of the Republic. He reminded him of how that kingdom had provided us with decisive resources in our struggle of independence from Spanish rule, and that as a consequence, no sacrifice was too great if it would allow a family of such distinction to feel more at home in our country than at their own home. Florentino Ariza, of course, gave up his cabin. At first, he did not regret it, for the river was high at the time of the year when the boat navigated without any difficulty for the first two nights. After dinner at 5 o'clock, the crew distributed folding canvas cuts to the passenger, and each person opened his bed wherever he could find room, arranged it with the bedclothes from his petate, and set the mosquito over that. Those with hammocks hung their dining room, wrapped in the tablecloths that were no change more than twice during the trip. Florentino Alisa was awake most of the night, thinking that he heard the voice of Fermina Daza in the fresh river breeze, ministering to his solitude with her memory. Hearing her sing in respiration of the boat as, as it moved like a great animal through the darkness, until the first rosy streaks appeared on the horizon, and the new day suddenly broke over the serene pastureland and misty swamps. Then then his journey seemed yet another proud of his mother wisdom, and he felt that he had fortitude to endure forgetting. After 3 days of favorable weather, however, it became more difficult to navigate between inopportune sandbanks and deceptive rapids. The river turned muddy and grew narrower and narrower in a tangled jungle of colossal trees where there was only an occasional straw hut net to the piles of wood for the ship's boilers. The screeching of the parrots and the chattering of the invisible monkeys seemed to intensify the midday heat. At night, it was necessary to anchor the boat in order to sleep. And then the simple fact of being alive became unendurable. To the heat and the mosquitoes was added the reek of the strips of salted meat hung to dry on the railings. Most of the passengers, above all the Europeans, abandoned the pestilential stench of their cabins and spent the night walking the decks, brushing away all those predatory creatures with the same towel they used to dry their incessant perspiration, and at dawn they were exhausted and swollen with bites. Moreover, another episode of the intermittent civil war between liberals and conservatives had broken out that year, and the captain had taken very strict precautions to maintain internal order and protect the safety of the passengers. Trying to avoid misunderstandings and provocations, he prohibited the favorite pastime during the river voyages in those days, which was to shoot the alligators, sunning themselves on the broad sandy banks. Later on, when some of the passengers divided in two opposing camps during an argument, he confiscated everyone's weapons and gave his words of honor that they would be returned at the end of the journey. He was inflexible, even with the British minister, who, on the morning following their departure, appeared in a hunting outfit with a precision carbine and with a double barrel rifle for killing tigers. The restrictions became more drastic above the port of Tenerife, where they passed a boat. Oh, this is proof. Flying the yellow plague flag. The captain could not obtain any further information regarding that alarming sign because the other vessel did not respond to his signals. But that same day, they encountered another boat with a cargo of a cattle from Jamaica, and were informed that the vessel with the plague flag was carrying two people sick with cholera, and that the epidemic was wreaking havoc along the portion of the river they still had to travel. Then the passengers were prohibited from leaving the boat, not only on the ports, but even in the uninhabited places where they stopped to take on wood, so that until they reached the final port, a trip of 6 days, the passengers acquired the habits of prisoners, including the pernicious contemplation of a packet of pornographic Dutch postcards that circulated from hand to hand without anyone's knowing where they came from. Although no veteran of the river was unaware that this was the only tiny sampling of the captain's legendary collection. But in the end, even the distraction was no expectation, only increased the tedium. Florentino Ariza endured the hardships of the journey with the mineral patience that had brought sorrow to his mother and exasperation to his friends. He spoke to no one. We're almost about 1 p.m. Oh, yeah, it's almost 1 p.m. Let me see, where are we? So we're going to close with 5 minutes to go. The days were easy for him. And where? Florentino is endured the hardships of the journey with the mineral patience that had brought sorrow to his mother and exasperation to his friends. He spoke to no one. The days were easy for him as he sat at the rail, watching motionless alligators sunning themselves on the sandy banks, their mouths open to catch butterflies, watching the flocks of the startled herons that rose without warning from marshes, the manatees that nursed their young at large maternals and startled the passengers with their women's cries. On one single day, he saw three bloated green human corpses float past, with buzzards sitting on them. First, the bodies of two men went by, one of them without a head, and then a very young girl whose Medusan locks undulating in the boat's wake. He never knew, because no one ever knew, if they were victims of the cholera or the war. But the nauseating stench contaminated his memory of Minadasa. This is so telling. Listen to this part. An epidemic and a civil unrest. Well, that time it was a war in Colombia, but listen to this part. The, First, the bodies of two men went by, one of them without a head, and then a very young girl whose Medusan locks undulated in the boat's wake. He never knew, because no one ever knew, if they were victims of the cholera or the war. But the nauseating stench contaminated his memory of Hermina. I'm going to leave it right there for you guys. It's page 142. This is getting more and more detail into the love story of Fermina Daza and Florentino Ariza. I have some questions that some people have sent, but I'm going to answer them next week when we read in English. Um, and then if you are following, of course, we're going to read this Friday in Spanish. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for reading with me these wonderful love stories. Very slow now because we're going into the details of the relationship, but things are going to happen. And if you catch this in the middle of us reading, just tune in, because the book takes us back and forth and explain how they fell in love and the purpose of the writing and the importance of writing and telegram communication at that time. Thank you so much, and I will see you then this Friday at noon for reading in Spanish, and we'll see you next Monday at 12 noon for reading in English. So I'll talk to you soon, and thank you so much. Bye bye.